5 minutes ago with a tearful farewell, we report the sad news of Russell Crowe. Goodbye, Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe was mentioned in relation to Steve Irwin's widow, despite the fact that she hasn't dated in the 17 years since his passing. Even after 17 years, Steve Irwin's family continues to mourn him on a daily basis. Terry, Steve's wife, who raised their 2 children alone and has since opted to stay single, found losing him to be very tough. She was once linked to actor Russell Crowe, a close friend of her husband, despite her choice. The world was first introduced to Australia's unique fauna by Steve Irwin, who was a favorite of all animal lovers. He was adored by everyone, and millions of people wept when his passing was announced in the news. Terry, Steve's wife, was the one who loved him the most out of all the individuals that adored and cherished him. When Terry, who was born in California, first visited Australia in 1991 to tour wildlife rehabilitation centers, they had their first encounter. She fell in love with it right away. She was traveling across Australia when she spotted a small sign for the Australia Zoo and made the decision to visit. The lovely garden and content animals within won her heart. When she first met Steve, he was doing a crocodile show and talked fervently about the reptile. She was a biologist, conservationist, and author in her 20s at the time. Terry found it hard to imagine that crocodiles could be discussed so positively. Steve gave the crocodile some food at one time. Steve didn't flinch when it jumped up and grabbed his hand. Terry was taken aback. I gave in. This man, in my opinion, is the most amazing person I have ever seen, she spoke. Terry assumed at the time that Steve was missing. She once remarked, Steve was about 29, and I was 27, and the first thing you assume is, he's probably in a relationship. She had no idea that Steve's heart began racing rapidly as he spotted her in the crowd. He too experienced love at first sight. He finished his performance and bade the crowd farewell after realizing he was sidetracked by a crocodile nearby. Terry surprised him by staying behind to speak with him. Terry was unsure of the best way to ask Steve whether he was single, but Steve intuitively knew it was a question she had been meaning to put to him. "Would you like to meet my girlfriend?" he queried, hoping to start a conversation. Terry felt devastated. Terry assumed that Steve's girlfriend was nearby when he yelled, "Hey, Suey," at that point. Instead, a tiny puppy came over to them. Boom, absent girlfriend. Terry responded right away, and so their sweeping love tale started. Terry and Steve fell in love right away. They were married a year after meeting and after just 4 months of engagement. In addition to being a fervent conservationist, Steve was a loving father to his 2 children. He and Terry are parents to Robert, a son, and Bindi, a daughter. Many people might assume that Steve's life's work is to be an outstanding conservationist. He sees it like becoming a father. Once he said, "You hear people say things like, 'I'm capturing crocs, I'm protecting animals, I'm doing this and that,' but I felt the same way with little Bob when Bindi was born. Similar to thinking, 'This is why I was put here.' When Bindi was born, Steve sobbed and proudly displayed her to everyone in the hospital. He was so overjoyed to learn Terry was expecting Robert that he couldn't wait to share the news with everyone. He called his parents and then informed the zoo crowd that Terry was expecting a child. Standing next to one of their most known crocodiles, who once attempted to drag him back into the water, he made these remarks. Their family was rocked by a tragic death. Steve and Terry divided their time between running Australia Zoo, making documentaries, and raising their 2 kids. They were doing what they loved every single day and enjoying their best lives. But on September 4, 2006, the Irwin family's lives underwent a permanent change. Steve Irwin was tragically stabbed in the chest by a stingray while filming a new television program on the Great Barrier Reef. A typically docile stingray suddenly aimed one of its barbs at Steve's chest as he was swimming over it. Without recognizing it, Steve believes the stingray had pierced one of his lungs. Justin Lyons, a member of the team who was with Steve that day, claimed that the stingray most likely mistook Steve's shadow for a tiger shark. Before transporting Steve to the shore, where paramedics were waiting to start CPR, the camera team around him made a valiant effort to rescue him. The boat's crew urged Steve to keep his kids in mind while he struggled for survival. "I'm dying," he remarked as he calmly turned to face them. Steve had said it as his final statement. The entire incident was captured on camera, but John Stainton, a close friend of his, pledged that no one would ever be allowed to see it. Instead, video was submitted straight to the police to help in their investigation. Except for one, which was given to Terry, Steve's wife, his team destroyed the videos after the authorities returned them. She also smashed it without even looking. Steve's body was transported by Stainton on the 6-hour flight back to Queensland. He sobbed the entire way home as Terry, Bindey, and Robert saw Steve in a coffin for the very first time. "He and I were the only passengers on the plane for the entire 6 hours. I cried nonstop for 5 hours. It was traumatic," he remembered. Bindey was 8 years old and Robert was just 2 when Steve passed away. Only Bindey could comprehend what was going on at the time. Even months after Steve's passing, Sarah spoke at the Australia Zoo on her father's drive to inspire others to share his love of animals. She called him her hero and discussed how he was as a father. She swore to continue her dad's devotion as she concluded her speech. She uttered, "I don't ever want my father's passion to fade. Like he did, I also want to aid wildlife that is in danger. I had the best father in the entire world, and I shall continue to mourn him." Although his father passed away when Robert was still a child, Robert also has warm memories of the wildlife conservationist. He has a ton of footage with his late father because many of their escapades were captured on camera. In fact, Robert enjoys seeing the tape and expresses gratitude for having so much to reflect about. He has material to watch that will immediately spark his recollections whenever they began to fade in his mind. He proclaimed with pride, "I've got virtually my entire life on tape, and those early years with Dad. That's something I appreciate more than anything." Robert wishes to carry on his father's legacy in the same way that Bindey promised. He wants to ensure that his father's message never fades and to make him proud. Losing Steve wasn't easy for his children, but Terry was particularly affected because she was suddenly carrying a lot more responsibility. She had to manage running a zoo and parenting 2 small children, while also grieving the loss of her husband, her best friend, and her soulmate. Terry and her kids were surrounded by cameras for years as they recorded their efforts. Every time they had to explain how they were coping with the death of Steve, Terry wouldn't hesitate to express how much she missed him. They developed a bond while watching Daddy DVDs with her kids in the morning. This meant that she would play a clip from one of Steve's documentaries, and even just hearing and seeing him on the screen brought on a sense of comfort and familiarity. But when she's by herself, it's a completely different story. She acknowledges that in addition to being sad and terrified when the kids are asleep, and she is left alone with her thoughts. Without her best buddy by her side, she has had to deal with things on her own. Others accused Terry of exploiting Bindey through her shows, and Terry also had to deal with criticisms of how she was raising her 2 children. Terry is adamant that Bindey and Robert had the best childhood despite everything. They were surrounded by the things they liked and given the opportunity to view the world in a way that not many Australian kids did. Terry decided to stay single. Terry has decided not to date anybody else and does not intend to do so in the 17 years since Steve's passing. She once said, "I had my happily ever after, so I'm doing all right." Terry acknowledges that she might not have married at all if Steve hadn't been around back then. She was a single lady who worked to conserve animals while maintaining a business in Oregon. She even had times when women would approach her, assuming that she was gay, and that was why she didn't have a boyfriend. The voyage to Australia, however, ultimately led to a permanent change in her life's trajectory. Terry still has a strong connection to Steve and is passionate about their marriage. She doesn't need to search for anyone else because she has already found Steve to be her soul partner. Despite this, she continued to face relationship allegations in the wake of Steve's passing. People began equating her with actor Russell Crowe in 2018. Terry made it clear in an interview that Russell Crowe was just a close family friend. Russell and Steve were friends, and even after Russell passed away, Steve continued to help the Irwin family. Terry lauded Russell for his extreme loyalty. He's a really kind man, but he's really simply a good friend. Terry is satisfied with her job at Australia Zoo, her 2 children, and her granddaughter Grace Warrior, as well as her life overall. Grace is shared by Bindi and Chandler Powell, her spouse. Although Steve has never met his granddaughter, he plays a significant role in her life. Grace frequently visits the Australia Zoo, where she frequently encounters pictures of her grandpa crocodile. Bindi is certain that Steve would have been the best grandfather, bringing Grace on all the best trips if he had been around to be with her. Grace discovers more about her grandfather through video of him working with animals and with the rest of the family in addition to visiting Australia Zoo. Grace will undoubtedly develop into a ferocious nature conservationist like her parents, grandparents, and uncle. Robert doesn't have a family of his own and devotes a lot of his time to wildlife conservation work, both at Australia Zoo and across the nation. Fans have remarked on how similar he is to his father, sharing their shared love of wildlife and his willingness to share it with the world on social media. Steve and Terry will mark their 31st anniversary of marriage in 2023. Terry said that their love and legacy continue to this day as they celebrated their 3rd decade of marriage last year. She keeps herself occupied, so occupied that she isn't even thinking about pursuing other men. She is happy with the amazing love she shared with Steve, even though she misses him every day. Since he passed away almost 20 years ago, Terry has made it her duty to continue his legacy and his enthusiasm. She said, "Even though he passed away at 44, he had such a rich life, and that's what I want to accomplish and share. Thanks for watching my video."